Call of Cthulhu: Dark Corners of the Earth has been in the works for a very long time. The game was originally announced way back in the late 90s, actually, and all the work that went into it shows. The game is set in the early 1900s, and you play as a private detective named Jack Walters. He's kind of your typical PI, but he's got somewhat of a mysterious past. Seems he was locked away in an insane asylum for a while, but one day he just kind of got better, and a whole 6-year period of his life he simply can't remember.
It's starting to look kind of funny there for a while.
One day he gets a case to go investigate a town called Innsmouth, and he arrives there looking for a missing person, and he starts encountering a lot of very surly people who something's just not right about them, and figuring out exactly what's going on around here is really what's behind the whole game.
Innsmouth don't take too kindly to them from out of town. Get lost, stranger.
So, suffice it to say that there's much more to Innsmouth than meets the eye, and you wind up in some new areas that are very surprising indeed. The game has a pretty broad scope to it and puts you up against some things that you're just not going to expect when you first walk into it. And one of the things that's really great about Call of Cthulhu is that you view the entire experience through the eyes of Jack Walters. Sometimes you even see his hands and things kind of come up into the screen for these real-time first-person cutscenes. So you really get immersed in the game. There's no heads-up display elements, no ammo readouts or anything like that. The game does a really good job of giving you contextual information where you need it. So you know when you're getting messed up by enemies, you know when you're starting to lose your mind, actually, because that's one of the things that's unique about Call of Cthulhu and was central to the work of H.P. Lovecraft, the idea that some evils in this world are so maddening that the human mind can't even fathom them. So the game tries to model some of that stuff by making your vision start swimming, making Jack Walters see hallucinations and things like that. For the most part, these types of devices work very well.
Rest now, Jack. You are safe.
The characters you'll encounter in Dark Corners of the Earth are really quite an interesting lot, particularly when you get to talk to them, just because they have these gurgling, kind of creepy voices, and you know something's wrong with them.
Sleep well, and keep down the racket. Us Innsmouth are quiet folk.
When you get into a firefight, they're not quite as impressive, but there are some really interesting scripted sequences in the game that combine with the artificial intelligence to make for some really harrowing moments, such as when you're forced to flee from certain enemies. You realize it's one of those things that games don't do often enough. If you've ever seen a horror movie, you know that half the time it's about running away from something trying to kill you than it is about standing and bearing down on it trying to fight it. So Dark Corners of the Earth actually has moments like this where the only obvious option is to get out of there or else you're going to die. And these moments can get frustrating, they can be pretty hard. The game is definitely on the tough side overall, but the challenge really is rewarding if you stick through it and keep pressing forward. And once you finally get to the end, you'll be treated for an ending that is very true to H.P. Lovecraft form, let's just say.
Your history, Jack, and your future. I don't understand. In time.
Call of Cthulhu may look like a first-person shooter, but again, it really isn't. It's more about exploring the environment, solving puzzles, figuring things out, sneaking past enemies than it is about killing them. In fact, one of the great things about the game is that you don't even get a gun in your hands for a very long time. And once you finally do, it's just this incredibly satisfying moment. Finally, you can fight back against your opponents. But it turns out that the shooting action in the game is neither central to the gameplay, nor is it particularly good. The stealth isn't all that great either. You basically just crouch and make sure guys aren't looking at you as you're sneaking past them. But still, elements like these work together along with the puzzle solving and the dialogue and the exploration and all that stuff to make for a pretty kind of cohesive and atmospheric game. Despite how effectively the game creates atmosphere for the most part, there are definitely times where the game undermines your suspension of disbelief a little bit. For example, Jack Walters has a typical private investigator type of gumshoe voice, but even as he's experiencing these totally maddening things that are causing his teeth to chatter and causing him to mutter to himself, he'll still kind of go back to speaking in typical monotone PI style, as if nothing's really happened. When the game breaks into its first-person cutscenes, it goes letterbox and also switches to this kind of grainy film stock look, which seems sort of unnecessary considering the game is going for this total immersion. And the other thing that stands out is don't expect these visuals to be on the level of, you know, your Far Cry's and your Half-Life 2s. This game has a lot of detail in its environments, but these aren't cutting-edge graphics either. And finally, Dark Corners of the Earth definitely has some bugs in it, at least in the PC version. There's also an Xbox version of the game that's got some issues of its own, whereas on the PC, you're going to get a better looking picture if you have a pretty modern system. And really, that's about the only difference between the PC version and the Xbox version, because you've still got the same limited save system and all that. So there are aspects of the PC version of the game that feel like they got held over from the console version. You're going to have to forgive a few flaws if you go into Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth, but overall the experience of playing this game is really well worth it if you're looking for a very atmospheric and just genuinely creepy horror-themed game. There are plenty of games out there that make you fight lots of scary monsters and things like that, but Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth instead is much more about kind of psychological terror and just being in these very creepy and disturbing situations where you're really just trying not to get noticed by all the horrible stuff happening around you. So it's very successful in this for the most part, and it's well worth experiencing, and it's going to last you a good 15 hours or so to get to the bitter end of this game. So if you're looking for a very uniquely disturbing horror-themed game, definitely check it out.